Leonarda Cianciulli, the human soap maker, Nanny Doss, the giggling granny, and Dorothea Puente, the sweet, sweet old lady. These are three of the most evil grandmothers who turned out to be some of the most infamous serial killers of all time.
I used to be a very good person at one time.
Why are you in the penitentiary now?
All the time, back to my husband.
Born on April 18, 1894, in the Italian town of Montella, Leonarda Cianciulli had a tragic life from the start. She attempted to take her own life twice before she became an adult. When she got married in 1917, Cianciulli claimed her mother placed a curse on her because she disapproved of the marriage. In 1917, Cianciulli went to prison for fraud. Upon her release, she and her family moved from Potenza to Lacedonia, not too far from her childhood home. On July 23, 1930, an earthquake struck. It would later be categorized as one of the most destructive earthquakes in Italian history. Cianciulli was one of the thousands who lost their homes in the disaster. Between her trying to take her own life, her mother's alleged curse, and multiple miscarriages, Leonarda Cianciulli realized that her life was not all that great. So she went to see a fortune teller for some insight. The fortune teller told her, "In your right hand, I see a prison. In your left, a criminal asylum." Dwelling on her mother's alleged curse and the fortune teller's prediction, Leonarda Cianciulli became deeply superstitious. When her son Giuseppe told her in late 1939 that he was going to join the Italian army, Cianciulli turned to the one thing that she believed would keep him safe: human sacrifice. It's unclear where Cianciulli got her idea to sacrifice humans in order to save her son from dying in World War II. But regardless of where she got her idea, Leonarda Cianciulli will go on to murder 3 women before she was caught. Leonarda Cianciulli's first victim was a local woman named Faustina Setti, inviting Setti to her home, making her think that she was setting her up with her future husband in 1939. Cianciulli instructed her to write letters to her family members, telling them that she would be visiting a man. But Cianciulli drugged Setti with a spiked wine before using an axe on her. Next, she cut Setti into 9 pieces and gathered her blood into a basin. In her official statement after her arrest, she described things that she did next.
I threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the whole mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured in several buckets and emptied in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood in the basin, I waited until it had coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine, kneading all the ingredients together. I made lots of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came to visit, though Giuseppe and I also ate them.
Cianciulli also reportedly took Setti's life savings of 30,000 Italian lire, the equivalent of $17.94. On September 5, 1940, Cianciulli found another victim named Francesca Soavi. She convinced Francesca that she had organized a teaching job for her in another country and made her write letters to her friends detailing her trip. And as she had with Setti, she fed her, used an axe on her, baked her into tea cakes, and stole her money. Her third victim, however, would be her last one, Virginia Cacioppo. Cianciulli had promised her a job, which prompted Cacioppo to pay her a visit on September 30th, 1940. Just like her previous 2 victims, Cianciulli had fed Cacioppo, spiked her wine, and used an axe on her. This time, however, instead of only baking her body into tea cakes and feeding them to her neighbors, Cianciulli also melted her down and turned her into soap.
She ended up in the pot like the other 2. Her flesh was fat and white, When it had melted, I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, I was able to make some most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes too were better. That woman was really sweet.
Immediately, her disappearance was reported to the police, who quickly investigated Cianciulli. At first, Leonarda Cianciulli defended herself. It was only when the police shifted the blame toward her son Giuseppe that she finally broke down and admitted to everything. Cianciulli's trial lasted only a few days. She was found guilty of her crimes and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in criminal asylum. Exactly what the fortune teller said. Leonarda Cianciulli died October 15, 1970. Nanny Doss's story begins with her birth to a family of farmers in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Instead of going to school, all 5 of the children stayed at home to work on household chores and tend to the family farm. At age 7, Doss suffered a head injury while riding a train. The head injury changed her life forever. By the time she was a teenager, Doss dreamed of living an idyllic life with her future husband. Reading romance magazines, especially the Lonely Hearts columns, took up much of her spare time. At the age of 16, Nanny Doss married a man she had only known for 4 months. They had 4 children together from 1921 to 1927. The marriage fell apart at that point. They lived with the husband's mother, but she had the same abusive type of behavior as Nanny's father. Perhaps it was the mother-in-law that kickstarted Nanny Doss's murdering spree. The 2 children died under mysterious circumstances that same year. One moment, the kids were perfectly healthy, and then suddenly, they died. The couple divorced in 1978. The husband took his older daughter with him and left a newborn with his ex-wife and mother. Just a year after her divorce, Nanny married her second husband. He was an abusive alcoholic named Frank. Despite how he treated her, the marriage lasted 16 years until 1945. During this period, Nanny likely killed her own newborn granddaughters a few days after they were born, using a hairpin. A few months after the granddaughter's death, her 2-year-old grandson, Robert, he died all of a sudden. He died in the care of his grandmother. These 2 kids belonged to her oldest child, with her first husband. But the thing is, Frank, he was next. Nanny mixed a secret ingredient into his hidden jar of moonshine. He was dead in less than a week, on September 15, 1945. Now her new husband was dead. People assumed he died of food poisoning. Meanwhile, Nanny collected enough life insurance money from Frank's death to buy a plot of land and a house near Jacksonville. Arlie Lanning of Lexington, North Carolina, died in 1952, several years after he responded to a Lonely Hearts classified ad placed by Nanny, playing the doting wife. Nanny added poison to one of Lanning's meals and he died shortly thereafter. He was a heavy drinker, so doctors attributed the heart attack to alcohol. Richard Morton of Emporia, Kansas, was Nanny's next true love, although he spent a lot of time with other women while married to her. However, Nanny wouldn't discover this just yet because she was distracted with other matters. Nanny's mother needed a caretaker after she failed and broke her hip in 1953 after her father passed away. The woman died suddenly, a few months after Nanny agreed to take care of her. Shortly after her mother's death, one of her sisters died suddenly after having contact with Nanny. She was too consumed with her mother's health to find out about Morton's affairs. After she took care of her mother and sister, she turned her full attention to her cheating husband. He died under mysterious circumstances. Nanny Doss's final victim was Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was neither drunk nor abusive. He simply made the mistake of telling his wife that she can only read magazines or watch television shows that were educational. She laced a prune cake with poison. Samuel Doss spent a month recovering in a hospital. A few days after he got home, poison-laced coffee finished him off. This is where Nanny Doss made a mistake. The doctor who treated her fifth and final husband had suspected foul play during his month-long hospital stay, but he had no proof. So the doctor who convinced Nanny Doss, who was to receive 2 life insurance benefits after the 5th husband died, to let him perform an autopsy. The physician said it was a good idea because the autopsy would save lives. The doctor found huge amounts of arsenic in Samuel Doss's body and alerted police. Nanny Doss was arrested in 1954. She soon confessed to killing 4 of her 5 husbands, but not her family members. Authorities exhumed some of Doss's previous victims and found extraordinary amounts of arsenic or rat poison in their bodies. It turns out that the common household ingredient at the time was a potent way to kill people without anyone suspecting a thing. Doss blamed her murderous escapades on her brain injury. Meanwhile, journalists gave her a nickname, the Giggling Granny, because every time she would tell her story of how she killed her late husbands, she laughed about it. Eventually, Nanny Doss died in prison in 1964 while serving a life sentence for the murder of her last husband.
How many girls are in the women's side at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary?
There's 31 on my side and 26 on the colored side.
Do all the girls call you Manny?
No, she called him calls me Mama.
Mama?
Yes, sir.
May I call you Manny?
That's right.
Where were you born, Manny?
I was born in Alabama. Anderson.
Did you have a large family?
I had 4 sisters and a brother.
Were you rich?
No, sir. Farmer.
Did you work in the field?
Yes, sir.
How long?
All my life.
How old were you when you first got married?
16,
And how many times were you married?
5.
Why are you in the penitentiary now?
Oh, the claims I killed my husband.
Which is your last husband?
Yes, sir.
Did they say you killed any more?
Yes,
As your other husband? Which other?
3 of them.
Did you?
No, sir.
How did they say you claimed they you killed it?
They claimed I poisoned them.
But you say you didn't poison?
I didn't.
At the time you were convicted, was there a lot of talk in the newspapers about that conviction?
Yes, sir.
What did they say?
Oh, they said all kinds of nasty things.
Do you think they were right?
No, sir.
Do you still maintain that you did not poison either your last husband or anybody else?
I certainly do.
Manny, what would you like to have more than anything else in the world?
Well, my freedom first. And the next, I like a small TV for my room.
You like to watch television?
Yes, sir.
What do you like to see?
Well, I like to see a good story. I like to sing and good singing.
You mean preaching?
Yes, sir.
Do you listen to preaching sermons within the prison wall?
Yes, sir.
About music?
I listen to all kind of music.
What
I
kind of
enjoy music. Well, I really like hillbilly music.
How about this rock and roll Elvis Presley music here?
Well, I don't feel very much about it myself.
How about the younger girls?
They enjoy it very much.
Getting back to the reason you were convicted, who do you blame for that?
Myself.
Why?
Well, I didn't know anything about it, and well, the county told me to go down and plead guilty. I just did.
Do you think it's valuable for people to have some knowledge of the law
I certainly do.
in cases like this?
I certainly do.
Dorothea Puente, born on January 9, 1929 in Redlands, California. She was the sixth of 7 children, but didn't grow up in a stable family environment. Her father died of tuberculosis when Puente was 8, while her mother, an alcoholic, died in a motorcycle accident a year later. Orphaned, Puente and her siblings splintered off in different directions, bouncing between foster care and relatives' homes. Puente moved out on her own when she was 16. In Olympia, Washington, she tried to make a living as a streetwalker. Instead, Puente found a husband. She met and married Fred McFall in 1945, but their marriage was brief, only 3 years, and hinted at trouble beneath the surface. Dorothea Puente had several children with McFall, but didn't raise them. She sent one child to live with relatives, while another was put up for adoption. By 1948, McFall asked for divorce, and Puente drifted south to California. There, she turned back to a life of crime. She got in serious trouble for the first time in her life after bouncing a check in San Bernardino and spent 4 months in jail. Puente was supposed to stick around to serve out her probation, but in a sign of things to come, she skipped town instead. Next, Dorothea Puente went to San Francisco, where she married her second husband, Axel Bryn Johansson, in 1952. The marriage was troubled with fighting and arguing. Despite this, their marriage lasted until 1966. Puente's next 2 marriages would be short-lived. She married Roberto Puente in 1968, but the relationship dissolved 16 months later. Puente then married Pedro Angel Montalvo, but he left her only a week after they were married. Social workers in the 1970s looked upon Dorothea Puente in her boarding house with admiration. Puente had a reputation for taking in people considered tough cases, recovering alcoholics, drug addicts, the mentally ill, and elderly. But behind the scenes, Puente had embarked on a path that would lead her to murder. She lost her first boarding house after getting caught signing her own name to tenants' benefit checks. In the 1980s, she worked as a personal caretaker who drugged her clients and stole their valuables. By 1982, Puente was sent to prison for her thefts. She was released just 3 years later, although a state psychologist diagnosed her as a schizophrenic with no remorse or regret, who should be closely monitored. Instead, Puente opened up her second boarding house. There, she quickly got back to her old tricks. Dorothea Puente took in so-called shadow people, people who were marginally homeless, without close family or friends. Some of these people began to disappear, but no one noticed. Even probation officers who stopped by accepted Puente's explanation that the people living at her house were guests or friends, but not boarders. In April of 1982, a 61-year-old woman named Ruth Monroe moved into Dorothea Puente's house. Soon after, Monroe died from an overdose of codeine. When the police arrived, Puente told them that Monroe had been depressed due to her husband's terminal illness. Satisfied, the authorities ruled Monroe's death as self-induced. In November 1985, Dorothea Puente hired a handyman named Ismael Flores to install some wood paneling in her home. After Flores had finished the job, Puente had one more request: for him to build her a 6-foot-long box so she could fill it with books and a few other assorted items before the pair of them would bring the box to a storage facility. But on the way to the storage facility, Puente abruptly asked Flores to pull over near a riverbank and just push the box into the water. On New Year's Day, a fisherman spotted the box, noticed it looked suspiciously like a coffin, and informed the police. The investigators soon found the decomposing body of an elderly man inside. However, it would be 3 more years before authorities could identify the body as one of the tenants in Dorothea Puente's house. It wasn't until 1988 that the suspicions first arose about Puente, after one of her tenants, 52-year-old Alvaro Montoya, went missing. Montoya struggled with mental health issues and had been homeless for years. He'd been referred to Dorothea Puente's house because of her sterling reputation welcoming people like him, unlike many who passed through Puente's boarding house. However, someone had their eye on Montoya. Judy Moyes, an outreach counselor with Volunteers of America, became suspicious when Montoya vanished. She didn't buy Puente's explanation that he had left on vacation. Moise alerted police, who went to the boarding house. They were met by Dorothea Puente, an elderly woman with big glasses, who repeated her story that Montoya was simply on vacation. Another tenant, John Sharp, backed her up, but as the police prepared to leave, Sharp slipped a message to them, stating that she's making me lie for her. The police returned and searched the house, finding nothing. They asked permission to dig up the yard. Puente told them it's fine, go ahead. And she even provided him an extra shovel. Then she asked if it was okay if she went to go buy coffee. The police said yes and started to dig. Dorothea Puente fled to Los Angeles. The police dug up 78-year-old Leono Carpenter and then 6 more bodies. Eventually she got caught and charged with a total of 9 murders. Puente was flown back to Sacramento. On her way back, she insisted to the reporters that she didn't kill anybody, claiming, "I used to be a very good person at one point." But in 1993, after several days of deliberations and deadlocked jury, Dorothea Puente was ultimately convicted of 3 murders and received back-to-back life sentences. Dorothea Puente died in prison of natural causes on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. These are 3 of the most evil grandmothers who turned out to be some of the most infamous serial killers of all time.
How long have you actually lived at that residence?
I think I moved there in '78, but I was in prison for, I was incarcerated from May the 19th.
1978?
No, 82 until September the 9th of 85.
Okay, so you actually started living there in 1978,
Uh-huh,
and you lived there until 1982, until May when you were sent away.
right,
And then you got out in September 1985,
right,
and you've lived there ever since.
right, okay. I was sent to prison in September of 82. August the 23rd, excuse me, August the 23rd.
August 1982, August 23rd.
But I was incarcerated from May the 19th on.
Okay, so from 1978 to 1982, you lived there, and do you remember who lived there before you?
No. I don't. No,
You don't remember?
No. But I've only had the downstairs for a year.
Who lived down there?
Well, I don't have the downstairs, but I collect the rent from my nephew.
Okay.
He lived there before.
What's his name?
Ricardo Ordorica. Ordorica.
Does he live here in Sacramento?
Yes. I don't remember the address.
How old is he?
About 50, 48, something like that.
Okay, approximately. He's in Sacto too, right?
Yes. Well, I pay monthly rent, We've never signed an agreement.
Okay.
But they rented the place out while I was gone, but the utilities stayed in my name. And
So the utilities of the property are in your name?
Uh-huh.
Who pays taxes on it?
My nephew.
He pays it.
Uh-huh.
So you pay all the utilities on the property is in your name.
Uh-huh.
And you have a verbal agreement lease
Right.
that you are to live there and
Right.
maintain and take care of the property?
Right. When I was gone, he rented my apartment out, but kept the,
I used to be a very good person at one time.
Nightmare Files.